Right, so despite strong allegations that Keir Starmer pressured the Speaker of the House of Commons, Lindsay Hoyle, to abandon precedent and set aside a standing order put forward by Labour on an SNP Opposition Day debate in order to scupper a meaningful vote on an immediate ceasefire, precedent now matters again, it would seem, to the three Deputy Speakers who have all opted to not allow a vote to refer Starmer to the Privileges Committee, accusing him of having pressured Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker. Not only is this appalling to observers who are seeing deputy speakers effectively rally to protect their boss Hoyle, but it has shown Keir Starmer that if he did indeed pressure Hoyle, he's got away with it and can do so again any time he wishes. Rules were abused to allow Starmer to get his own way. The accusations against him were strong enough it earned him a referral to the Privileges Committee, and now the rules are being buried again to cover it all up. That's what it feels like to me, a cover-up to arguably save Hoyle, save what went on between him and Starmer ever becoming public. But it is a conversation that there is public interest in getting to the bottom of, and it shouldn't be allowed to be swept under the carpet. The situation making it clear neither Starmer nor Hoyle are fit for office. Right, so we're back to Keir Starmer, Lindsay Hoyle and that SNP ceasefire vote, which Labour effectively hijacked, and the ramifications of it simply not going away. The SNP were bringing a ceasefire vote, as we remember, as an Opposition Day motion. They only get 3 of these Opposition Day debates versus Labour getting 17 of them. So to use one of theirs to call for a ceasefire in Gaza was a big deal. But they got well and truly shafted, didn't they? Rules, you see. House of Commons standing orders are rules, and Standing Order 31 relates to Opposition Day debates, where to give the relevant party its say on the day. The rule is, according to the standing order, that their motion will be heard first in the event that the government lays down an amendment. And if the government lays down an amendment, no other opposition parties get theirs heard, because by convention their amendment would have to be heard before the motion. That's no good on an Opposition Day debate. That would be hijacking it, because the relevant party, whose Opposition Day it was, in this case the SNP, could end up seeing their motion amended before they even get to bring it. It's their day, hence the need for exceptional rules for Opposition Days. This got set aside arbitrarily by Hoyle, apparently after Starmer leant on him. The official line is that Starmer convinced him somehow, no details given. But the allegations are that Starmer threatened him, threatened Hoyle that Labour would withdraw support for him following the next general election, where the Speaker must once more be selected, and Hoyle would quite like to stay in that post. What we saw here was a blatant breaking of convention, breaking of the rules. For a start, to set aside a standing order, that should have required a vote, and there was none. Hoyle took it upon himself to do this, again adding weight to the threat allegation. Adding further fuel to the fire that this was a blatant stitch-up was the fact Hoyle justified this at the time as an attempt to broaden the debate, when no such thing was needed, and it broke rules to do so. However, his story is inconsistent, because when he was dragged back to Parliament to justify his decision after the vote, he hid behind allegations of an apparent terrorist threat to MPs, which we've still seen no evidence for. Now, MP safety is of course a valid concern. 2 MPs have been murdered in recent years after all, but to say there is a threat after the vote, having not mentioned it previously, does smack of weaponising those deaths. Weaponising that threat, the threat of an attack. Why, after all, did Hoyle not just say this up front as his justification? Broadening the debate doesn't remove such a threat, if credible. And how does Starmer fit into that picture? If the threat was genuine, what Hoyle should have done was to call all party leaders in to discuss it behind closed doors and make them aware. But that didn't happen. All we know is that Starmer went to see him. Starmer admitted as much, and all of a sudden, rules were being broken. The SNP and the Tories stormed out of the Commons in the face of such a blatant stitch-up. Labour's lousy ceasefire amendment passed, meaning they can still say they back a ceasefire, despite not committing themselves to when or for how long. The lengths many think Starmer is prepared to go to shield Israel from any criticism and any sanction. Now, despite Alba Party MP Neil Hanvey making a complaint in light of these allegations, these alleged threats by Starmer against Hoyle, the rules matter again all of a sudden now, because Starmer will now not be recommended to the Privileges Committee for allegedly threatening Hoyle, because matters between the Speaker and MPs apparently must remain confidential. And so the 3 deputy speakers, Hoyle recused himself from this matter, have decided not to allow a vote to refer Starmer to privileges and standards. rules broken previously which brought about the call for Starmer's referral, but rules now being stuck to block it. A letter issued by the Deputy Speakers Eleanor Lang, Rosie Winterton and Nigel Evans to representatives of the Conservatives SNP and Plaid Cymru who had followed this referral up reads, Mr Speaker has received your letter of 29th of February asking for precedence to be given to a matter of privilege which you describe as the Leader of the Opposition's coercion of Mr Speaker, and in doing so improperly and substantially interference with Mr Speaker's performance of his functions. Mr Speaker has recused himself and remitted the matter to the Deputy Speakers to decide. He has done this rightly because the complaint is founded on reports of conversations between the Leader of the Opposition and Mr Speaker himself. There is a high bar for raising complaints of breach of privileges. Our role is to decide whether there is an arguable case to put this to the House. The complaint is founded on third-party reports of conversations held in confidence between Mr Speaker and others, including the Leader of the Opposition. The Speaker regularly has conversations in confidence with members, including party leaders and whips. This is normal practice. Erskine May notes that the Speaker will also advise members of all parties when consulted privately upon any action which they propose to take in the House or upon any questions of order which are likely to arise in its proceedings. The Speaker's role requires his conversations with members to remain confidential. All parties should be able to rely on that confidentiality. Allowing matters of privilege to be raised on the content of confidential conversations would undermine that principle. There is no precedent for granting precedence to a complaint based purely on allegations of what might or might not have been said in a public meeting. In this case, the evidence put forward is media reports of what others told reporters they had overheard or had understood to be the case. There are no direct accounts of what was said from anyone who had been in the room. The advice we have received is clear. Based on that advice and on the precedents we have examined, we have decided to not give this matter precedence. Our decision is unanimous. It simply isn't good enough, and there are a number of issues I take umbrage with here. For one, quoting the parliamentary rulebook Erskine May is not a good look when it looks like Hoyle happily bent the rules to suit Starmer. Certainly, it got him off the hook conveniently when he was facing a massive rebellion. The rules matter now, but not before. Well, you don't have to be familiar with all the rules themselves to know that's not right and that something here stinks. There's a lot of talk of precedent here, but the thing with precedents is until you've done a thing once, there is no precedent for it. Has the Speaker ever been coerced by a party leader in the past, or has it always been shushed up if it's ever happened before? Because if that is a precedent, it wants ending. There's talk of confidentiality there. However, we know Hoyle sought advice from the Commons clerks, so that only goes so far. And such things are clearly discussable behind closed doors. And indeed, we know Hoyle did something they didn't like, and indeed is how we know he sought advice from the clerks, because one of them submitted a complaint about it, which I covered in a previous video. But we also know that Labour MPs were instructed to play for time, while Starmer was allegedly putting the hard word on Hoyle. One such MP, Chris Bryant, of course, admitted as much in an interview afterwards.
The way we do our business in Parliament is terrible. I mean, we brought ourselves terribly into disrepute, I think, on Wednesday.
But were you put up to that filibuster, or did you take it upon yourself?
A bit of both, if I'm honest. I think the whole day was grubby, right. And we need a system which doesn't allow people to manipulate the rules to be able to get what they want.
Which you did. Yeah.
That chuckle at the end, I guarantee he knew what he was doing and why. Confidentiality, though, protecting whatever Starmer and Hoyle discussed, is also being given precedence over the actual vote here, though. The entire Opposition Day debate and vote got subverted to suit Keir Starmer, and that is obscene. That cannot be right. How can that be deemed more important than the actual vote? That is a ridiculous position, yet that is what the Deputy Speakers have in effect decided. So what now? Well, I've no idea if this is possible or not, but it strikes me that nobody in Parliament ought to be above scrutiny or above privileges. Lindsay Hoyle, we know, went against the clerk's advice. They issued a letter to that effect saying that. So ought Hoyle himself be referred to privileges, in which case? Where the Deputy Speakers blocked Starmer's referral, could they block Hoyle's theoretical referral too? Or would they not be seen as impartial in this instance, being his juniors? In which case, who would decide then? Would that have to go to a vote? Would that be a vote Lindsay Hoyle would likely lose? Whatever does or doesn't happen in relation to this going forward, so public trust in Lindsay Hoyle is completely decimated. And amongst MPs too, I dare say. This will be never forgotten, and Starmer is clearly personally ambitious enough to the point of being anti-democratic if there's any truth to these allegations of coercion laid against him, which have not been put to bed. They're going to hang around as yet another example of why people really shouldn't trust this guy and why he shouldn't ever be allowed anywhere near power. Hoyle's position is completely untenable. He couldn't get his story straight. He appears to have weaponised racism and news of an alleged attack on MPs no previously mentioned to protect himself. Find out the details of that on this video recommendation here, though, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.